Indigenous communities have lived and moved through this place over time. And so we recognize also the Wampanoag and Nipmuc people, among others. Indigenous people from many nations live and work in this region today. I ask you to join us in acknowledging their communities, paying respect to their elders past and present, and recognizing their active presence and their futurity. Reposed in the generations present and those to come. We affirm Indigenous sovereignty and will continue to work to lift up Indigenous voices in all that we do at Harvard University. Along with the legacies of the ongoing settler colonial project and the continued erasure of Indigenous peoples and histories, we also acknowledge the historic benefit that the university has drawn from slavery. By acknowledging this past, we aim to recenter our understanding of the lands and peoples that have underpinned the history of this institution, and to take the first step towards accepting responsibility and beginning the process of institutional atonement. So we've been working in a group at Harvard this year to hold a 2-day in-person event on immigration detention, which has been postponed, hopefully to next year. But we really still wanted to have this conversation today with Aly and Guerline now. And the webinar format is actually enabling us to have a reach far beyond Harvard. And given everyone who has signed up, we're excited that we are bringing students and advocates and practitioners together in this space, which has been one of our goals. And I want to deeply thank Laura Cuellar Cortazar, who's been an absolute joy to work with. And I want to congratulate you on graduating from Harvard Graduate School of Education with your master's degree this semester. Laura is the co-director of the UndocuAllies initiative this year at Harvard, and she's going to tell us a little bit more about it.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, thank you so much. It's so beautiful to see some new faces, new names, but also some really great friends from Kid City and Los Angeles. Yes, as Tina mentioned, I'll be soon to graduate for my master's at school at Harvard, and my major will be education policy and management. Currently, I am co-chair of UndocuAllies, and what UndocuAllies is a student organization at the Harvard Ed School, which aims to educate communities about issues affecting undocumented people. This past fall, my fellow co-chair and myself surveyed the Harvard campus to see what was being done to support undocumented people. And what we found was that there were very few discussions and efforts to combat the immigration detention crisis. So we were really pushed and motivated to think about and explore different ways of connecting with people on campus that were already doing immigration advocacy work, and see how we could bring this conversation to campus, and now through the access of webinar beyond campus, which is great. So in the process of surveying and learning about what people at Harvard were doing, we found amazing scholars like Tina Shull. So thank you so much, Tina, for your incredible work. And Tina really was asking the tough questions about immigration detention and mass incarceration at Harvard, and was kind of like inspired us to form a coalition where we can organize against detention centers and also promote the well-being of immigrant people from across the diaspora. So as Tina mentioned, originally it was going to be a detention forum of 2 days, but because of our current COVID crisis, we have hopefully postponed it to a later date, and we hope that today we can start the conversation through a webinar and centering the experiences of Black migrants and scholars, Black migrants with scholars and activists like Aly Wane and Guerline Jozef. So yeah, let's get started. Tina has done an amazing job of summarizing all your questions. Thank you so much for filling out the RSVP form. We will be using those questions that you post to us to have the conversation today. And if you have more questions as the conversation evolves, please at any point in the webinar, put them on the chat box, and I will be monitoring it and posing the questions to Tina and also to the to our speakers and Aly and Guerline. So yeah, thank you all, everybody, for joining us. And we will begin with Tina, who will be providing some historical context of mass incarceration and immigration enforcement. Thank you.
Thank you. So over the next 75 minutes, I'll speak briefly about the history of detention, and then Aly and Guerline will share about their work and discuss also how we got here, how mass incarceration, anti-blackness, and immigrant detention and exclusion are intertwined, and what's happening currently at the detention, in detention at the border, and especially with the COVID-19 crisis. And then we'll also talk about intersectional and abolitionist organizing and what we can do. At the end of this slideshow, which we are sharing the link to it in the chat box. At the end of this is a Google slideshow. At the end of it, there is a link to a Google Doc that will be an expanded list of resources that will provide answers to many questions that we won't get to today, but also places to act, to donate, to volunteer, a little bit more about organizations that we're uplifting, and some suggested readings. So definitely check that out. And we will update it afterwards with the link to this recorded webinar. It is being recorded. And if anyone has any additional resources or suggestions for things to add to our shared list, you can pop it into the chat or you can email me. And my email address is also at the end of this slideshow. So the COVID pandemic is actually drawing our attention from everything else right now, it seems, but it also gives us an opportunity to talk about everything together, to see how the pandemic exacerbates inequities that have long been endemic to our systems, that might enable us to better draw connections across them and to rethink our ways of being, and to bridge struggles for economic, health, migrant, gender, racial, and environmental justice. There's been an escalating crisis in detention the last 2 months, hunger strikes, an uprising at the Bristol County Jail in Massachusetts relating to COVID, and last week, Carlos Ernesto Escobar Mejia was the first to die of COVID at the Otay Mesa facility in San Diego. But communities are also fighting back, and they're filing litigation, securing bond and humanitarian release for those most at risk. Just this week in California, advocates won a mass release of women at the Mesa Verde facility in Bakersfield, and there have been many other examples across the country. And here is Guerline, featured in the Miami Herald just on Monday. The US has been deporting people who are COVID positive to Haiti and Guatemala, but after media coverage and activism, on Monday, those testing positive were removed from a deportation flight. But 50, including children, were still deported. So while this is dire, I want to emphasize that it's not entirely new. Mass incarceration has long been a crisis. I became a historian in the wake of my ex-husband's deportation in 2007, where we experienced retaliation and trauma in the system. I became an overnight activist, a bumbling one, in the wake of and in response to my personal crisis. But being a student at the time, I found that history and ethnic studies to be the best teacher and the best healer. I needed to find out for myself how this country came to imprison people systematically and for profit. And it's hard to explain how lawless and unjust the detention system is. One of the best accounts that I've read is Mark Dow's book, American Gulag, written in 2004. It shows how entrenched this system is and how most of the problems that it highlights are actually still persisting or have even worsened over time. The lack of access to legal aid, communication with the outside, medical care, unhealthful conditions, abuse and violence, all before Trump and COVID-19, and even before the creation of ICE in 2003. So here I'm showing just for a visual side-by-side graphs of the rise of incarceration since 1978 on the left and immigration detention rates on the right since the early 80s, when policies shifted and incarceration trends began to sharply increase. The history of migrant detention should be understood as part of a larger historical process of white settler colonialism and racial exclusion, alongside Native American removal and erasure, slavery, convict leasing, and Jim Crow segregation. And immigrant inclusion and deportation has been going on since the late 1800s. And these have laid the foundations of the rise of mass incarceration. And the practice of systematically detaining migrants largely subsided after World War II, but new punitive detention practices returned in the 1980s and were enacted by the Reagan administration, which is the subject of my current book project. Anti-blackness, anti-indigeneity, and queer phobia were at the center of the rise of the modern detention system since the 1980s. This was a pivotal time when Reagan's renewed globalized war on drugs and Cold War foreign policies displaced and targeted Haitian, Cuban, and Central American migrants in particular. Much like how African Americans were targeted by the war on drugs, Afro, Indigenous, and queer migrants were at the center of public hysteria over immigration. Haitian migrants faced the most extreme discrimination in the system and were the only group subjected to a new program of interdiction on the high seas by the Coast Guard and mass detention and deportation. Neoliberal economic policies and prison privatization beginning in the 80s were then furthered by the Clinton administration. This has been both a Republican and a Democratic project over the decades. In 1994 to 1996, crime and immigration bills furthered the acceleration of detention and incarceration numbers through the expansion of what scholars call crimmigration, which is just the criminalization of migration and the expansion of categories deemed deportable offenses requiring mandatory detention and deportation. These bills also aided the private prison industries and infused more of a profit motive to the system. Since 9/11 and the creation of Department of Homeland Security and ICE, this system has only grown further, especially through more collaboration between immigration enforcement and local law enforcement, such as in programs like 287G. And in 2009, Congress passed a law instituting a quota, or a minimum of 34,000 people in detention a day. This was lobbied for by private prison corporations. The Trump administration inherited the keys from the Obama administration, which many have labeled the great deporter in chief, and has ramped it up to extreme levels. We've had a record number of people in detention, over 50,000 in the last year. However, right now, because of the COVID crisis, we are under the quota and detention numbers are under 30,000 and dropping. So many aspects of the detention system are invisible and not very well understood by the public, including the disproportionate impact of enforcement on Black migrants. The Black Alliance for Just Immigration has a report from 2016, and these numbers may be a little outdated, but they're very illustrative. Even though Black immigrants are 5% of the undocumented population, they make up about 10% of the detention population, and 20%, or 1 in 5, of those being in removal proceedings for having a past criminal record. Mbaji concludes that just like African Americans, Black immigrants suffer disproportionately high arrest, prosecution, and incarceration rates, despite no evidence that they engage in more criminalized activities in comparison to any other racial group. And also, I want to note that this is not to add a label of criminalization to the migration experience. I think our conversation is an effort to remove those labels and to really question them and question narratives of good versus bad, deserving and undeserving immigrants. And I'm sure we will talk about that as we go. So we hope to explore these intersections today, and I couldn't be more honored to share this space with these two amazing people that I am truly honored to call mentors and friends, Aly Wane and Guerline Jozef. I met Aly over a decade ago when I began organizing online to combat anti-migrant narratives in the media. And Aly is a longtime anti-war, labor, human rights, and undocumented organizer. He's a frequent public speaker and commentator, and he currently sits on the board of the Syracuse Peace Council. Guerline Jozef, I have known for the last several years in Orange County working on detention issues. And Guerline is the president of the Haitian Bridge Alliance, which aids migrants at the border and in detention. And she has been awarded several community service awards for this work. And Aly and Guerline, they both walk the talk in every sense of the word, constantly demonstrating love, patience, humility, generosity, and wisdom in their organizing work. And so I will end the screen share here and love to ask both Aly and Guerline, I'm not sure who wants to go first, but I would love to ask you how you're showing up today and if you can tell us a little bit about your current work and how you came into it.
Okay.
Aly, go ahead.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
guess I'll go first. So first of all, I want to thank Laura and Tina for inviting us to this very important conversation. So yeah, my name is Aly Wane. I'm an undocumented activist. By the time we got to DACA, I was actually too old to qualify for that, so I'm pretty much ancient, in the movement. Right now, my work is more speaking and writing and analysis from the organizing years that I've done. I started organizing on this issue maybe around 2007 or so. Right now, I'm moving a little bit into analysis rather than doing frontline work. Because to be honest, I've had to take a break. As Guerline is going to share, this is extremely hard work to do. And it's been hard to see the escalation, throughout all of these different eras and different administrations that have only escalated and escalated. Before I even get started on sort of where I am, I did want to thank you, Tina, for grounding us in place, which is that we are on Native American land. And I think this is the kind of deeper analysis that we want to have, that we need to have in the migrants' rights movement. That, this deportation crisis that we're seeing right now is an escalation of a logic that has always been in this country's DNA. When we talk about deportations, we need to start with Native American expulsion and genocide. That's as far back as much as it was caked and built into the system. And in order to have a sense of where we are now, we need to understand that there's nothing anomalous about what we're seeing. This is what has been in the DNA of this country. In terms of sort of how I'm showing up today, I think like most folks, I have some good days and some bad days. I think this COVID crisis is going to reveal the cruelty of a lot of this system. And right now, I'm mostly focusing on local mutual aid efforts that feel tangible. But with the group that I'm working on, the Syracuse Peace Council, we're really trying to figure out, how do we transition into digital organizing, which is going to be really important. As for how I came to this work, like a lot of folks, I certainly did not choose this life. I came here legally at the age of 9 on a student visa, which, actually originally on a diplomatic visa that got changed into a student visa, and then I lost that visa technically back in 1996, which is when, of course, Clinton's laws came into effect that really sort of worsened the immigration situation. So I lost my status and became one of the undocumented, but I was very idealistic and I wanted to still do social justice work. So I did a lot of anti-war work, a lot of anti-globalization work. We did a lot of work to talk about the impact of the World Bank and the IMF on different so-called third world countries. Which gave me actually a really good grounding into understanding the migration situation once I got to become an organizer. But the situation came to me, I think it was maybe around 2007 or so that some of us in our community here, I live in Syracuse, New York, we started to hear some, chilling stories of people being disappeared off the streets of Syracuse. People would come to us as activists and they would tell us, like my dad went to the grocery store like 3 days ago. We have no idea where he is. And what we ended up finding out through our connections to people who do detention work was that these were undocumented immigrants who were being rounded up by Border Patrol and ICE, usually for things like driving without a license or something like that. And these people were being funneled into basically the deportation machinery, which is how a bunch of us decided to get together. We founded a group called the Detention Task Force, and we try to do the, hard, anti-deportation work that most of us have gone through. And I would say that I started out doing this work incredibly naive about the system, and very much still invested in the system. I did what you're supposed to do. We contacted politicians, we talked to judges, we did all the right things, and yet we lost so many of these cases to deportation. And that's when I realized that my analysis needed to go deeper, and that's when I really started to think about the prison industrial complex. And ever since then, my analysis has deepened, and I hope that during this conversation we can make those important connections between the broader system of mass incarceration and how immigrants fit in it, and to combat the idea that somehow immigrants are like they're the undeserving criminals as opposed to everyone else. I think that we need to shift our perspective and to fight against mass incarceration as a whole with our US citizen kinfolks. So I'll just start with that.
Thank you so much, Aly. For those who are on the webinar can see how amazing Aly is. And before I start, I also want to say thank you to Christina and Laura for working with us and putting this together to highlight and uplift the voices of Black migrants in the middle of this crisis. I don't have to go back into too much details, as you heard from Laura, Tina, and Aly. The state of Black migrants, the state of criminalization of immigrants at the border, in country, in detention centers. We are going to really dig deeper so that we can share with you experiences on what's been happening. As Tina mentioned, when we look into immigration detention, that literally started with Haitian refugees coming into this country in the 1980s, and they were put in detention prison, put in Guantanamo Bay, and be able to see how this whole system is based on racism and discrimination, specifically on Black people, on Black migrants, and Haitians, when they doomed Haitians as being carriers of AIDS, into the country and into the world. To see how the intersectionality of all those different aspects intertwine in the system that we see today. And as Tina mentioned, it is not something that just happened, last year at the border. That's something that has been happening from the beginning, as we see with our indigenous brothers and sisters that are still on today dealing with expulsion throughout the Americas. So how did I come into the work? Even as an immigrant myself, I was very naive as to the pain, how the pain that people had to go through. I had the privilege of coming to New York on an airplane. I had family to receive me, extremely grateful for that. But now, looking at what people have been dealing with and what people continue to live, the reality that people continue to live, bring me to a whole different aspect of the movement and the work and understanding of who we are and where we stand. For me personally, starting the detention work and starting really deeply into immigration work started 4 years ago in 2016. At the end of 2015, beginning of 2016, a lot of people left Brazil coming to the United States. So the majority of those people were survivors of the earthquake, and they were able to go to Brazil on a humanitarian program where they relocated, and they worked really hard. They helped build for the Olympics, for the World Cup. But unfortunately, as we all know, at the beginning of 2016, both the economy and the political system in Brazil kind of collapsed at that point. And obviously, the first people to feel the pressure, the first people to feel the load were the immigrants, were the newcomers, were the refugees. And they did make a decision to take the road from Brazil, crossing all of Central America, South America, coming to the border here in San Diego and Texas and Arizona, asking for asylum, asking for refuge. So we received a call that said that they had Black people at the border. I mean, what do you mean they have Black people at the border? So we just went to see, to verify if it was true. And that first night, we met 12 young men and women, and the rest is history. Over the past 4 years, we have been able, to serve, assist, collaborate with over 10, 15,000 Haitian migrants, and then realizing there were not only Haitian migrants, there were other migrants from different countries in Africa, from Cameroon, from Sierra Leone, from Eritrea, and then realized we have to continue to do the work, not only for Haitians, for Africans. And then in 2018, when the wave of Central Americans came, we all been together to be able to provide the necessary assistance and help that was needed and continue to be needed. And by the end of 2018, we had over 4,000 to 5,000 Haitians in the immigration detention centers across the country. So that is why we do what we do, because we understand if we don't do it, then who will? Looking at Aly, who worked since 2007, the burnout is real, the pain is real. When you are part of an impacted community, you have no choice but to do what needs to be done. So I bring my full self to the movement, the good, the bad, the ugly, the whole thing, and be able to be that bridge for those who are in need, to connect with other advocates and organizers to be able to bring down the wall and build bridges. So that's how I show up, in the movement.
Thank you. Thank you so much for giving us that context of your work, and also of the experience of Black migrants on their journey to the US-Mexico border. I want to move to a question from the participants who registered that I really love, and maybe I'll direct this to Aly first. Especially given the numbers we were talking about, if Black migrants are only 5% of the undocumented community, and then we have thousands of Haitians in detention, why center Black migrants? What does immigrant justice look like when Black people are made a priority?
The shorthand of that is that I believe that our immigration system is rooted in white supremacy, which is what all of these different systems are rooted in. If you're talking about Native American genocide, that's also rooted in white supremacy. And if I could be candid, the first year that I organized on immigration issues, I did not want to talk about white supremacy because I did not want to offend my white friends. And by the end of that first year, I remember thinking to myself, I cannot speak to this issue without talking about race and without talking about whiteness, Blackness, all the different, social constructs of race that we've created. The anti-immigrant movement is steeped in white nativism. And those of us who happen to be undocumented and Black have to live those two realities. And therefore our analysis is, I think, we're a little bit more clear-eyed about the system. And what I mean by that is, I like to call those of us who are undocumented and Black the cynics of the immigration reform movement, because we don't have the luxury of thinking that getting access to paperwork is going to make us like more valued or more safe in this country. If I became a citizen today, I would not be able to remove my Black skin. And having grown up as a Black person in this country, I know very well what it looks like to be profiled. I know very well what it looks like to have cops pointing guns at me because I fit the profile of a suspect. I had to learn what it meant to be Black in the US context, and that is a very brutal reality. Recently we just had this traumatizing video of, Ahmaud Arbery, and I think there was another recent one with Breonna Taylor of another Black person who was killed. Well, as a Black immigrant, I am not protected by any of those things. Even if I get access to citizenship at a certain point, I'm still going to be Black, and I'm still going to not have the access to safety and not be valued in this society the way that I deserve to be valued. And so by centering the stories of undocumented immigrants, you create a lens through which you can critique American citizenship in a much more clear-eyed way. I think that a lot of the immigration reform movement is about, especially policy-wise, creating pathways to citizenship, quote unquote, so that you may have access, quote unquote, to the American dream. Now, for those of us who are undocumented and Black, we know that getting paperwork is not necessarily going to give us access to the American dream, which, if you ask me, is a selfish nightmare, but that's a broader conversation to have. So I think that because we understand that this is not just about access to citizenship, that it is about critiquing this broader system, we have a much more critical lens so that we can understand that we're part and parcel of a broader system of oppression. Once I understood that immigrants in detention were simply a subset of the broader prison industrial complex, and once I understood that in order to liberate myself, I needed to be tied to the liberation of my, poor Black and brown, mostly US citizen friends who are in incarceration, that's when I started to realize, that is what we need to be attacking and critiquing, not sort of begging to have access to US citizenship. We need to be asking why our people are incarcerated. And I'll just give you one quick moment. I remember when Trump started to ask for, for parents and of immigrants to be separated from their children. Like most of you, I just, I was depressed. I remember even crying over it. But I remember thinking to myself, well, this is what mass incarceration is. It's separation, It's not, we shouldn't simply have compassion for immigrants who don't, quote unquote, deserve to be incarcerated. We should be asking ourselves the question of, why are we okay with incarcerating people in the first place? And how do we create an abolitionist vision of solidarity in order to liberate all our people from the cages, not simply thinking about how do we, as undeserving, quote unquote, criminalized people, how do we get free? I believe that in order for me to truly get free, I need to be in solidarity with my Black and brown, and obviously some white US citizen friends who are incarcerated. So I think once you care for Black undocumented people, you care for people who are at the intersection of these realities, and therefore you can create the type of vision that you're not really going to see in Washington, D.C., because in Washington, D.C., they're fighting for immigration reform, which is a good thing because you want people to have access to citizenship in the sense that they deserve, their ability to work and not be deported and all of those things. But that's not liberation. Liberation is 2, 3, 4 steps further and interrogating the system, not simply saying, why have I been criminalized, but asking ourselves, why are we criminalizing people? Who are we criminalizing? How is it related to race, class, gender, all these different intersections? So I think those are some of the many things that Black undocumented folks can add to the conversation. And I certainly encourage folks to follow the work of the Black Alliance for Just Immigration and the UndocuBlack Network, who are constantly asking these types of questions.
Thank you. Guerline, do you have anything you want to add to that?
No, not really, except that we really have to understand our collective freedom are tied to one another.
Mm.
You know, my reality is that I am not free unless we are all free. And making that our North Star, to know that, as Aly mentioned, it's not just citizenship, it's liberation of all sorts. And it's freedom for people to simply be. And when we look at Black immigrants, and we go a little bit further at an LGBTQ Black immigrant, what they have to continue to go through. And as Aly mentioned, we cannot just take away the Blackness, right? That once people see a Black woman and a Black man, even a Black child, what does that mean for the mother and the parents and the community of a Black person who might just leave their home and never come back simply because they are Black? But now we look at a Black immigrant, undocumented Black immigrant who also is LGBTQ, you know, a person. How then we see that my liberation as a Black heterosexual woman is connected to the liberation of my LGBTQ members, of my brown community members, of my indigenous community members, of my Caucasian community members who are in the fight for justice. Because we have to understand that it takes all of us in order to have the freedom, true freedom that we are fighting for. And in Haiti, we say, l'union fait la force, un pile méchai pa l'eau, which means together as a community. And when we look at the detention centers, immigration detention centers, as my friend Zach from BLMP always say, the cages, right? Because when we say detention centers, it sounds so innocent. It's a place that people are just being detained. No. The realities of people who are in immigration prison, who are caged without access to legal assistance, without access to community, without access to family, is beyond comprehension. So that's why one of the things that we want to continue to do is to call it for what it is, so that people understand that is the reality. And at the end of the day, as we see with this COVID-19, that has opened up the lid of all the injustices and inequalities that exist within our community, within this great United States of ours, right? This COVID-19 has proven to be an equalizer also, but to show the reality of the lack of equity that exists within our communities and within the country.
Thank you, Guerline. I was about to ask you if you could, which you already began to do, if you could speak to us a little bit more about COVID and the current situation that people are facing in detention.
Yes, thank you, Tina. Wow, where do I begin? You know, we all know having people caged in dorms of 50 to 100 people, understanding the danger that comes with that within this pandemic. Before COVID-19 became what it is now in the United States, we've been voicing for the release of people who are caged, people who are asylum seekers, immigrants, people who are within the immigration and prison systems, understanding that it can become a death trap, which it actually is, because we understand now the minimum testing that has been done, and also over 60% of those who have been tested positive for COVID-19. Understanding here in California, when we look at Otay Mesa detention centers, when they have over 150 cases, when we look at Adelanto, one of the most notorious immigration detention centers, in the country, where we have hundreds upon hundreds of people being tested positive for COVID-19, and understanding that they are deporting people, right, from those mass infected spaces into countries like Haiti, into countries like Guatemala and Honduras and Nicaragua, right? And then understanding that we have called for this to not happen, but they refused to allow those people to be reunited with their families where they could be safe. So we are asking for them to be freed, for them to be released. We have people who are extremely traumatized, being in detention centers. One of our clients who got deported on Monday was detained for close to 2 years. And as we heard before, because of lack of legal assistance, legal representation, those people, for example, these Haitian men who do not understand the legal system of the United States, we see attorneys, advocates, judges who are baffled, right, by how to proceed when they are dealing with immigration laws. Now we have a young man who walked for 5 months, crossing 11 countries, barely make it to arrive and ask for asylum because he has a credible case. They put him in immigration prison, but unfortunately, he did not have money to hire an attorney. He did not have access to communicate with his parents, with his family. He got deported closely after 2 years. Also understanding that people who are in detention are being asked to pay a bond in order for them to be released. And that bond can be anywhere from $1,500, and we have seen all the way up to $80,000. And when you don't have a family to pay your bond, and you don't have money to pay your bond, most likely you will be in prison indefinitely, and at the end of it, they will deport you. So the reality of immigration prison, and I'm saying that again, not detention, but prison, is that it is a death trap for people who are being there, and triple that for a Black immigrant, for an LGBTQ Black man or woman, transgender women or transgender men who are being forced, right, to be, if it's a transgender woman, being forced into the general male population, and vice versa, and understanding the risk that comes with that. We have report of sexual abuse, of physical abuse, mental abuse, of solitary confinement just because you ask a question. We had a woman who was going to be released, and they were going to put a GPS on her ankle simply because she asked why, because she didn't know what it was. They deemed that she did not deserve to be released because how dare she ask why. So the reality of taking every ounce of somebody's humanity in order to quote unquote deter immigrants from coming to this country is beyond understanding, it's beyond comprehension. So this system, as we know, based on racism, is continuing to do that, to destroy people's mind, soul, and body, and then continue to continue the same system of colonization that we don't see, right? We don't see it because now we don't have slavery, we don't have all of that, but this is the same continuance of the same system that have been happening in this country for a very long time.
Thank you, Guerline. 2 quick follow-up questions. What is the situation of Haitians and others who are in Tijuana right now or elsewhere? Are they effectively stuck? And also, I think a lot of participants on the call are very eager to learn about your successes. I know you were able to bond 2 people out just yesterday. And you know, people are wondering where they can plug their support in, and we have on the slideshow there's a link to your bond campaign and fundraiser, but just can you speak a little bit about yes, addressing the situation at the border, and then maybe some more. You're still doing this work anyway and succeeding.
Yeah, we have no choice but to do it. And some of it we can do virtually, but others we have to be on the ground. As you just mentioned, Tina, yesterday we were able to get 2 people released thanks to the National Bail Bond in Raíces, who paid for their bond. One of is a young man from Cameroon. Another one is a man from Eritrea. Last week, we were able to get 2 women from Haiti out on bond with the support of the National Bail Bond Fund, and we are working on getting some more folks released by the end of this month, and continuing the work. But for people who are still in Tijuana, we have 3,500+ Haitians who are still in Tijuana. We also have a large population of Africans from Cameroon, Eritrea, Sierra Leone, Senegal, and other countries that are stuck in Tijuana, and also in Tapachula at the border between Guatemala and Mexico.
You got muted there, Guerline.
I'm so sorry. I am getting calls from Adelanto. Calls from Adelanto as we speak.
If you need to answer that call, we can. I think Laura has another question.
Yeah, we can finish this part, and then I can probably exit for 1 minute.
Okay.
But
up to you.
Yes.
No problem.
Yes, thank you so much, Tina. And I apologize for those who are on the webinar, but that is the reality of the work, right?
Absolutely.
Calling from Adelanto, asking if they're going to be released. Are we going to be able to pay for their 25? And we have a young man, $50,000 bond that we are trying to raise on his behalf. But going back to the folks in Mexico, between Tapachula and Tijuana, what we are seeing is an extension of the U.S. policies, that have traveled south and continues to go deeper into countries like Honduras and Nicaragua and Panama and all of that. But right now, due to COVID-19, we are unable to do our regular bi-weekly Mexico trip. But we do have an amazing community organizer we hired earlier this month to be able to provide this type of assistance to the community. And he literally sent us a list of over 500 people that are reaching out, asking for food, a lot of them have lost their job, because the majority of the Black immigrants in Mexico, unfortunately, they cannot blend in like our Central American brothers and sisters who can fake that they are from Honduras or Nicaragua because they have the language. But for Black immigrants, for Black migrants who are in Mexico, they can't escape that reality. And also they are not part of the MPP Women in Mexico program, which then is another layer of difficulty for Black migrants. And as I mentioned, we continue to provide assistance for them by hiring a full-time community organizer working in collaboration with Alo Throlado, to be able to have that person in place to bring together the community and provide assistance for them. As far as immigration goes, they are literally stuck. They are in limbo. They are waiting to see what the next step will be. And a lot of those folks do not have access to medical care, do not have access to food, to housing. A lot of shelters are closed or closing because of coronavirus. So we are trying to see how we can continue to provide direct services in this time of crisis. And one of the things that our community organizer has been working with other leaders within the community in Tijuana is to provide door-to-door food distributions for them. And we also just started a program where we are trying to provide cash assistance, a cash card, I mean, for the people. They're trying to see if we can get $100 per family for the month, which is very small, very minimum, but at least they can get something to keep them through the next month as we continue to do the work that we do.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Guerline. We are so lucky to have you, and you're truly in the front lines, and so we have so much to learn from your work. A couple of questions have come up on the chat, which I think are extremely important to address. I think, Aly, you started talking about white supremacy culture and the systems that enact that. However, I think a lot of us internalize that white supremacy, and there's a couple of questions on how in the immigrant rights movement, there is sometimes explicit and implicit anti-blackness. So within our communities, whether it be Latinx communities or immigrant communities, there's still a lot of prejudice and anti-blackness. And in addition to that, there's also the prejudice of immigrants that are documented versus undocumented immigrants. And so how do we begin to have those conversations of anti-blackness, or the citizen versus the documented immigrant versus the undocumented, and create that unity amongst our communities?
Aly, are you going to take that?
Sure, I have some ideas, and I'm sure you have plenty yourself. I mean, within the immigrants' rights movement, there has always been some anti-blackness. The organizing spaces are mostly Latinx spaces. I think that towards the end of the Obama administration, we were starting to address the different issues that different groups like Black immigrants, Asian undocumented folks were facing specifically. But I think ever since Trump was elected, I think that the movement has sort of retreated back into much safer narratives, and the space has once again become mostly Latinx. but I don't wanna offer anything simple and easy and simply say, you know, like anti-blackness, you know, exists in the Latino community and you should be ashamed. Like, it's much more complicated than that. Anti-blackness is worldwide and exists in all of our cultures, including the cultures that we come from. You know, I'm originally from Senegal. Senegal is a mostly Black country. And yet I can tell you that there are colorist, you know, issues within Senegal. You know, like, this is me revealing maybe a little bit too much, but my own mom, who was very much a progressive and a feminist, I remember when I was a kid, she would say things like, you know, oh, that man is ugly because that person was like very dark skinned, you know, very dark skinned. So, and it took me years to understand, like, well, where did she even get that? And of course, you know, through studying sort of the history of colonialism and the ways different ethnic groups, you know, were pit against each other, that's how anti-blackness sort of emerged in sort of post-colonialist nations. And so I don't mean to overcomplicate this, but this is a very complex and tough conversation to have. One of the things that the Black Alliance for Just Immigration does that's very powerful, they have these conversations called the African Diaspora Dialogues. And those are dialogues between Black immigrants as a whole from the diaspora and African Americans around the issue of race and how on the African American side, you know, slavery has impacted them. On the Black migrant side, colonialism has impacted us. And just between these two groups of Black people, there's some healing but painful conversations to be had. So if even within those spaces it is hard for us to have these conversations, then certainly we have to expect that within our broader, more mainstream immigration reform movement, we're going to see a lot of anti-Blackness. But I happen to be someone who believes that, you know, there's always room to grow. There's always room for us to learn from each other with humility. And we need to not take these things too personally. I mean, and by that I mean, it's not simply about the interpersonal. Like in my trying to understand, for example, anti-Blackness or white supremacy, these things to me are systems. They're not just like opinions, you know. And until we can understand how those systems are deeply rooted and have infiltrated our own mental software. And I'll give you an example, a specific example, which when I participated in one of those African diaspora dialogues, I remembered something that made me feel ashamed, but I needed to get it out of my system, which was I came to this country when I was 9, right? And I think I was maybe 14 or 15. I remember walking down the street and I saw a group of 4 Black men walking towards me. Now, what I did was I immediately crossed the road. Once I crossed the road and I got to the other side of the road, I was just like, why did I do that? You know, like what kind of thing was in my sort of unconscious that as soon as I saw, you know, other Black boys, my first reaction was just like, yeah, I need to, you know, kind of stay away. And that was really embarrassing for me as a Black immigrant. But that's when I was just like, there's something going on that I need to get out of my system. And that's when I really started to dig down on, you know, African American history, culture. I talked to my African American friends. I sort of analyzed the media a little bit more to understand that, you know, even I as a Black man was not exempt from anti-Blackness. Anti-Blackness is deeper, it goes way deeper than simply blaming other races. It exists in Black people as well. So I'm not giving you any simple solutions, but what I'm saying is like within the movement, there is going to be some anti-Blackness and it's going to be our work to check that, but we can't expect that it's not going to be there. It's going to be a part of the struggle.
Mm-hmm. And I just wanted to add, because having been within the movement, actually ingrained in the movement deeply the past few years, yes, anti-Blackness is real, and understanding that it is a system that has enslaved our minds. When we look at our Hispanic brothers and sisters, what they learned, right, is that what they see on TV, and I can testify to that. I had a very good friend, and we were talking, and then she was saying things that were extremely racist, against Black people. Then she realized that I was Black. At that moment, I was not only her friend, but I was also Black. Then she says, "Oh, I'm sorry, but you are not like that." Right? But this is the image that is being sold around the world. When people watch television, wherever they are, they see the portrayal of Black in America as being savage, untrustworthy, as being delinquent and criminals and all of that. So the preconception that people have is something that's being sold to them, and it's hard for it to be removed. And that is why within the movement, a movement that I am a part of, a movement that I have brothers and sisters of different shades, ethnicity, and background, is to come to a place of understanding that our collective freedom and liberation are connected, and that we have to be able to break this wall, this mountain of prejudice and racism that we have been not only accustomed to, but we have been made to believe, right? That is part of very deep of our psyche, on the subconscious of what Blackness represent, because that has been ingrained into our very existence. And so, yes, when we look into the movement, there are a lot of anti-Blackness, but I am very happy to see there's a lot of healing happening, a lot of coming together, of understanding, of bringing together Blacks and AAPI and Hispanics and different backgrounds of people, so that we can understand the reality is that we all have been subject to this notion of Black is bad, and that the darker you are, the more undesirable you are, the less wanted you are, and the more criminalized you are. And also, as Ali mentioned, within the community, we see the divide between Black immigrants and African-American, native-born African-Americans. And then we often lose the reality is that once I step outside of my home, even inside of my home, nobody cares where I am from, and that the boat that dropped my family, my ancestors into Haiti, is the same boat that dropped, my fellow African American ancestors in Virginia and other places within the country. And I think that within the movement, yes, but we also see healing spaces happening within the movement. And my hope and prayer that we continue to come together in the most basic reality is that our freedom and liberty are interconnected.
Thank you. I'd like to kind of flip the first question that I asked. I think this leads into that. As we were just discussing anti-Blackness in the immigrant rights movement, maybe we can talk now about criminalization, narratives of criminalization. I hear a lot, and I am guilty of this myself. I remember in the early days of advocating for my husband and people in detention, kind of focusing on the non-criminal element of immigration detention, and that it's a civil procedure, and those narratives serving to divide communities between the good, the bad, the deserving, the undeserving. Narratives that focus on dreamers, on workers, on those without criminal records or the severity of criminal records. How do those do a disservice to efforts to bridge movements for immigrant rights and prison abolition? And then finally, abolition, question mark. There are some participants who may be less familiar with an abolitionist perspective and why that might be important.
I think Ali will be able to go more in depth with this question, but I just wanted to say, as an abolitionist myself, is that the reality of what you just mentioned, Tina, it's like an onion that needs to be peeled, right? There's so much going on in there. Ali, I know that you might be able to have a lot more insight on that part, if you don't mind.
Well, I don't know about having more insight, but what I can say is that to me, abolitionism came very organically to me as an activist. It wasn't something that I researched, it's something that I simply realized as an organizer. And there are lots of definition of abolition. You know, for some people, it's getting rid of all jails, all forms of incarceration. Some people are more reformist, but the basic premise is this. The system of mass incarceration is not working, and we need to reimagine it, and we need to think about what real healing and reparation and repairing harm looks like. To me, in terms of the sort of the narratives around good immigrants versus bad immigrants, this is where the conversation around criminalization is so important. What was this? Maybe a year and a half ago, I happened to be at the Ford Foundation, which was a very trippy experience. As a poor undocumented person, to be in that place where people kind of give out, huge sums of money, it was very strange. But it was at a conference where advocates of mass incarceration advocates, of course, against mass incarceration, came to together with those of us who had been immigrant rights activists for a couple of years to share ideas and analyses. And one of the things that one of the young, as per usual, Black women organizer, who was one of the anti-mass incarceration organizers, said to me was, as fighters against mass incarceration, we tend to show up at your protests, like when people want to deport you, when people want to do harm to you, all of those things, we show up at your protest, but you don't show up to our protest anywhere near as much as we do to yours, because in the back of your mind, you see yourselves as somehow special, that you're not really deserving, you're not really deserving criminals, that the things that are happening to you are sort of more unfair than the things that are happening to us. And it was like this light bulb moment for me, because that's sort of what I have been trying to articulate for a long time within our movement, is we should not think of ourselves as kind of these specially victimized people, as undocumented people. We are being targeted by a system of mass incarceration that has been there way before we got there. And that's where analysis has to be, is to continue to interrogate that system. Because even as Tina shared with you, for example, the history of the system, historically, this is super recent. This is very, very recent. Mass incarceration as a whole, really exploded in the 70s. And as Tina mentioned, the explosion of mass incarceration, it first began in sort of the 80s under Reagan. Then it really kind of expanded and exploded after 96. But these are very recent realities that in our minds, we've been, it's like we're used to thinking about these huge numbers of people being incarcerated, whether you're talking about the war on drugs or whether you're talking about, war against immigrants. We're simply used to thinking, oh, well, mass incarceration is the solution, when in fact, this is a very, very recent thing, which actually is a very hopeful thing, right? Because when you actually put the historical lens to it, you can just see oh, this does not have to be the option. This does not have to be the solution. We can imagine our way into new realities. We don't have to act to accept the huge number of people incarcerated, whether you're talking about the immigration system or whether you're talking about the general criminal system. And the problem that the immigration reform movement has had for a long time in creating this sort of good immigrants non-criminals versus undeserving immigrants, quote unquote, with records, is that how this has translated policy-wise is that members of both parties have been invested in sort of narrowing the definition of who is a deserving immigrant, right? So the criminalization process as a whole has been expanding and expanding and expanding. And now we're at a place where, DACA is on the chopping block, and you're starting to hear Republicans talk about, like, even the folks who have DACA, these young folks, who have access to education, who are doing all of the right things, it doesn't matter. They're talking about these folks, quote unquote, like they're criminals. So why don't we have a conversation about the criminalization process and not narrow the definitions of who is going to be deserving, but instead expand our analysis to realize, well, why is this student who's a dreamer more worthy or more worthy to fight for than this person who has a criminal record because, they smoked marijuana in their teens like most people did, And to be clear, I'm not even exaggerating. Like under the 96 laws, there's this law called, I think, aggravated felony that was created that expanded the level of criminalization in our communities. And those laws, of course, were passed by Clinton and the Democrats. Those things are very dangerous. We need to, at a moment when we are at a place of trying to retreat and trying to create ever more narrow sort of definitions of who's deserving, that's a very dangerous moment. Instead, especially because of this crisis, we have this opportunity to reimagine, who we have compassion for. And that's where the COVID-19 crisis could be an opportunity, because we should be caring about all of these people in jail right now. And if you don't care about them because you don't have empathy or values, this crisis can even activate your own self-interest, right? We don't want anyone to get COVID-19, including people in jail. Like, you are literally tied to their health and well-being. So, those are the types of arguments that we can start to marshal in this particular moment to move us away from really thinking about, like, well, if this immigrant does this and this and this and this and this, then maybe we can give that person a pathway to citizenship, 15 years from now. I understand that that's the conversation happening in DC, but that is not a conversation that is going to lead to liberatory politics.
And I would like to add to what Aly said, is the fact that we continue to allow this divide and conquer mentality and system that puts us in where we are in the first place. And we see that being an immigrant then means not being human. If you are an immigrant in this country, you cannot make any mistakes, because if you make mistakes, then you're not deserving of having a documentation, a piece of paper that says you're valuable and what's not. And I think we have to continue to bring the humanity into the space. Is that what we are allowing to happen is that if you are an immigrant, you are not human enough to be allowed to make any mistakes, because whatever mistakes that you make, that will follow you for the rest of your life, and that will most likely take away any possibility that you might have to be free and live free. And again, goes back to allowing this divide and conquer, good immigrants versus bad immigrants. And then we can see one thing that COVID-19, also did, is that a lot of our AAPI immigrant brothers and sisters, we know for a fact over the years, the systems that you see, the good immigrants, and then boom, something happened, and suddenly they are being attacked and all of that. And so at the end of the day, is to make sure that the humanity of people is not lost in a system that continues to turn people into criminal because of their skin color, because of their ethnicity, be based on the race and background. And we know over policing of community of colors. You know, if you go to the Bronx or you go to the heart of Baltimore, you see the over policing that then allows more young men and more young women to be, instead of going to school, but to end up in prison. And we see the trend continues with immigration prison, with the justice system, where overwhelmingly being people of color, but specifically Black people.
Thank you. I would love to, if I can, just share my screen again before I ask you a final question about what you need. There are a lot of questions about what we can do. People are very eager to get involved, especially now with the limitations of COVID. People are wondering, how can I still show up and get involved in this work regardless? And so I'm going to share a couple of things and then ask you both what it is that sustains you and what it is that you really would love support on. One of the questions posed that I really love was, how can we center Black migrant experiences in our individual work? And also, what can students do and other types of workers, public health workers, etc. So let me share this. Just a few last slides around what we can do. And Guerline, especially, feel free to jump in if you want to tell us a little bit more about the fundraising that you have right now. But the first thing on here is volunteering. There's a lot of things that people can do. You can sponsor an asylum seeker. You can actually be trained to provide legal aid, even if you're not a lawyer. The organizations Freedom for Immigrants and Allo Trollato do have these opportunities, and Allo Trollato does train people who are lawyers, maybe not immigration lawyers. They do equip them with the tools to help support this work. And then also, they always need help with translation. Visitation is limited right now with the COVID crisis, but there are opportunities to be a pen pal with people from organizations like Freedom for Immigrants. Beyond Boston is local to the Massachusetts area. And there's an organization, Black and Pink, that is in Boston, and that's also nationwide. There's also a great need for post-release support, and that doesn't necessarily need to be in the form of housing. It can be financial support. Maybe Guerline can speak a little bit more about that.
Yes. One thing I like to say is, again, thank you to each and everyone who are in this webinar. We are so grateful for you. There are so many different ways you can participate. It doesn't matter where you are within the country. Most likely there is a detention center, there is a prison, there are people within the community that needs help. As we move things from direct physical, physical services to virtual services, that allows a lot of people to join as well. As Tina mentioned, we are working with the Allo Trollato to be able to have non-immigration attorneys be trained to be able to take cases and represent people. We are looking for any immigrant advocate or any immigration attorneys. We are in dire needs of immigration attorneys. We have one of the programs we have is the Welcoming the Strangers program, where we visit people who are in detention, but now because of COVID-19, we are unable to go there. But what we have been doing is doing video calls and phone calls with people who are in detention, connecting them with families, connecting them with attorneys remotely. And when they get released, as Tina mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, for example, yesterday we had 2 people released. one of our volunteers who himself was in detention for over a year, assisted him with getting released. Now he's giving back to the community. He goes and picks them up from the detention centers. We go ahead and pay hotel rooms for them because we are unable to place people into our regular host families. We put them in hotel rooms, and then another person with our partners at FOCD was able to take them to the airport. So there are a lot of different ways people can be a part of that. One of the ways is that we have this Welcoming the Strangers GoFundMe that allows us to pay for flights. It allows us to pay for hotels. That allows us to pay for an Uber or Lyft, and also allow us to get food for them. So that is all over the country, really. And then we ask people to continue to assist by making a donation. We also just released the Black Immigrant Bail Fund because of the difficulties of people being in detention for years simply because they are unable to pay for their bond. We also partner with the amazing National Bail Bond Fund. We have the Orange County Justice Fund here in Orange County. We have Black Mamas Bail Fund, Raices, a lot of different ways people can participate. But the most what we are asking people is to really come alongside of us. It doesn't matter what your background is, what industry you think you're in, you're skilled or valuable. We are looking for people to continue with translation in English, Spanish, but we are looking also to be able to provide assistance and food for people in Tijuana. As I mentioned, we have a list of over 500 people who are currently waiting to receive assistance. Yes, we have a lot of amazing organizations that we are grateful to be working with. We have an amazing young attorney. Her name is Rebecca Alimayehu. She created the Ademayo African Dream, and we continue to work together to provide assistance for the Abisha from Eritrea and Ethiopia. We partner with the BMLP, with other Black-led organizations, UndocuAllies, Abisa in Detroit. So we really have a good group of folks that we work with. Families Belong Together, Forward US, and others who have been able to be on that journey with us. So right now, because of COVID-19, we understand that most people cannot be providing physical assistance, but we welcome, your financial assistance and any other type of way that you might be able to support virtually. We also continue to advocate for people who are in immigration detention centers. So we will probably be sending you updated information on how you can participate in campaigns. We are calling to free all immigrants and all people who are incarcerated. We are calling for testing, for providing testing for those who are in immigration prison. We are calling for providing health care for those who are in immigration detention centers. We are calling on assistance for TPS. We have over 131,000 TPS holders who are in the forefront, from healthcare workers to transportation workers to farmers. We want people to continue to support and push our elected officials to create bills that will also include all immigrants, documented and undocumented alike. Again, you can always go to our website. It is www.haitianbridge.org. We are in the middle of updating the website, but you can make a donation to the Welcoming the Strangers. And please email us info@haitianbridge.org. we are really eager for you to join us in this journey for freedom, liberation, justice, and love.
Thank you. I also we put on here organizing and direct actions. Recently, people have been doing car rallies, driving around near detention centers, while social distancing. Virtual campaigns are always ongoing, petitions, media campaigns, as well as litigation, supporting legal efforts, whether they're individual or class action lawsuits. Many are being filed to release people due to the COVID emergency. And so there is that opportunity there. And many on the call actually had asked, how the COVID crisis can be an opportunity to push for more abolitionist vision. And I think that we did touch upon that, but we will provide some more resources on those connections in the shared document. And then there's also getting involved in politics, which we may have varying levels of feelings about the upcoming elections. And there weren't many questions, if at all, about Trump and Biden. Maybe that's just the tenor of the crowd here. But we do have many tough choices coming up, and it's a very tough situation. But there's a lot of local, state level policies and candidates that we can get involved in, including just getting people registered to vote and working towards policy writing and lobbying and advocacy. And then finally, I would want to emphasize, I know self-care is something that's thrown around, but it is quite liberatory, and the need to find joy in this time, I think, is more important than ever, and to find community and create community. One of my favorite abolitionists and intellectuals, Mariam Kaba, always says that if one of the best things you can do is to make stuff, is to just get together with people and make things, whether that's witnessing and documenting what you are seeing, whether it's doing research, compiling resources, educating yourself and others through teach-ins, webinars like this, and writing your story, writing op-eds, making yourself visible as an advocate, and reaching out to these organizations and asking how you can support them with your specific skill set. So I'll end on that. And there is the shared document here and my email address, so feel free to contact us. And let's see, I think we are about out of time, but I want to allow Aly or Guerline to share any final thoughts. And then we had discussed earlier just kind of leaving the space open for those who can stay. If you cannot, that's fine. If anyone wants to hang out and ask some final questions. But we do want to thank you all for attending. Very, very grateful.
Yeah, I have a quick thought before we do the post questions. First of all, thanks again for this space. Guerline, you are amazing. Doing this work takes so much out of you. So I'm really glad that we talked about self-care. Doing this work can really take a chunk out of your psyche. I burnt out maybe 3 times over the past couple of years. I've had to learn to do this, a chunk at a time. And so it's important to talk about that. But and thank you to all the panelists, to all the folks who came to this teach-in. But one of the things that I especially want to address to the allies, those of you who are documented, is you are way more powerful and way more important than you know. I think I remember this moment after Trump was elected, when I think a lot of my friends who were sort of more on the liberal side of things, Democratic Party side of things, they were just, catatonic, and they were saying there's nothing we could do, and, the sky is falling. And certainly it was rough, but I remember maybe about a week after the election, I got on a call with a friend of mine who was another undocumented organizer, and he was just like, all right, let's get back to work, because we have not had access to the ballot we've realized that the way to liberation is through other things, like direct action, like shaking things up, like organizing from even inside detention centers, doing what we need to do to make the change. If undocumented organizers have been able to do this work, believe you me, as someone who is an ally, you are not powerless. There are so many things that you can do. I can't emphasize enough the importance of aiding people right now with bail funds. When I first started doing this work, like bail was maybe like $500 to $7,500 or so, and now to hear the numbers, the way it's exploded, and that can make a huge, huge difference. And I'm telling you, if you just donate like $10 here and there, that goes a long way. Mm-hmm. So I just want to remind you in this moment, even with COVID-19, join organizers who have already been doing this work. Whatever you contribute will be enough. And you have to know that. You have to have that mindset. You know, even if you can only contribute something financial or contribute your administrative skills, that makes a difference. Now is not the time to be paralyzed, because there are people who really are counting on you to be active. And so please make sure that you contribute what you can, of course, without burning out to the best of your ability, and do it safely as we try to figure out what digital organizing is going to look like in the age of COVID-19.
Thank you so much, Aly. It is such an honor and privilege to share the screens with you, and Laura and Tina for putting this together, and all the attendees for joining. The reality is, at the end of the day, we are all that we have, right? And we do depend on our allies to stand with and for those of us who cannot stand, those of us who cannot speak. Those people who are in detention, who are at the border, let them know that we hear their voices, we hear them, we see them, and we are here for them. We are here to be the vote that they cannot vote. We are here to be the voice that they don't have. And that it doesn't matter if you can pick up a piece of paper and write a letter to somebody who's in detention, or make a $1 donation to allow different groups to bail out people who are up to $50,000 and $80,000 that we have to raise, to be able to get people bonded out, or donate $1 so that we can be able to feed 500 families at the border in Tijuana, and be able to help those in Tapachula in prison. Or maybe just do a retweet of a tweet that one of us do, that then bring awareness to the plight of migrants in general, and Black migrants in particular. Do a post on Facebook and tag us and let us know how you are doing. How can we ourselves be of service to you as well, and continue to be that platform, because as for me personally, if not us, who, right? If we don't speak, if we don't fight, if we don't get up even when we don't feel like we can, then who will do it? So thank you so much.
Really cool. Thank you all, everybody. I think I was wondering, if anybody wanted to ask any more questions. We'll be here for a little bit. It's one of the things that I'm thinking about as we close is, and I think Tina and I talked about it, was how do we create sort of like a website or some sort of central space, because it sounds like there's a lot of interest in helping. And I just saw another question on Pittsburgh, like somebody's in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, what can they do? And I know Freedom for Immigrants has this amazing map where it has all the detention centers, and just thinking about people who can help do something similar, but for resources or for coalitions they can connect to in their neighborhoods or in their state, city. So just putting that out there, if anybody knows of anything that's maybe in process, that would be great. But if not, like if somebody would like to do something like that, or an organization would like to take that on, I think that would be amazing, because then we can just share one website, and then in the website, you can click on your area, your state, your city, locality, and then you can find those resources. Just to centralize everything, I think it would be really cool. But yes.
Yeah, Laura, one thing I want to mention is that we have the Welcoming the Strangers program in all the different states and cities. And what we are currently looking for is for team groups to come together to assist people. For example, in the Pittsburgh area, if we have somebody who just got released, or somebody who needs help, we know that we have a group of people we can call to be able to assist them. So this is one of the different things that have as part of the Welcoming the Strangers program, is that it doesn't matter which city or state or village that you are in, you are able to plug in and be able to assist in that way as well.
Super cool. Awesome. Thank you. There is a raise your hand function on the, if you click on participants. Oh, there we go. AB raised their hand. So what I'll do is I can, AB, I'm going to allow you to talk and you can go ahead and ask your question or share your comment. And let me, I think I have to unmute you. There you go.
Hi, yeah, my name is Abdullahi, and I want to thank you all for taking the time to talk about these important issues. I'm the one who's located in Pittsburgh. I'm here for school. I'm undocumented too, but I've been trying to really connect. I've been donating, I've been sharing posts, but sometimes I feel like I'm not doing enough, and also with the stress of like being in school full time. So I've just been. I also appreciate the links you guys have been sending. I'm definitely gonna look into them. But I also want to, participate by translating because I speak French. And this is for Guerline. I know that you have a lot of Haitians and a lot of West Africans. So maybe perhaps if you could maybe drop the emails of the people, the panelists, Ali and Guerline, I will appreciate that. So I could maybe follow up with them and get the information so we could work together. So.
Thank you so much. And please know that you are not alone, and that if you need something, do not hesitate to reach out to us as well. We are here with you and for you. I personally been through the system, from beginning to end, undocumented, documented, becoming a US citizen. So going through school, I know how difficult that is. So please know that you are not alone. If you need something, please reach out to us as well. You can reach me at info@hinbridge.org. And also Tina and Laura will send out a follow-up email to everyone with our information. But you can definitely reach out to me after this, and I'll be more than happy to talk with you and connect you as well to other folks within the area.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you, AB. Guerline, if you can type the info because I think I missed the other part on the chat, that would be great. And then we have one more, Anastasia. Yes.
Hello.
Yes. Hi, Anastasia. We hear you. Thank you.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate what's happening today. I was undocumented once upon a time, and I understand the struggle and the disturbing reality that we live as immigrants. I have also worked as a journalist in the Middle East, where I have encountered a lot of African, especially Ethiopian immigrants in Israel. And this is a very general question. What qualifications or what qualities should us immigrants look into a leader before we choose them as our next president, as our next congresswoman or congressman, what can we do in order to make sure that the person that we're choosing is a person who has empathy for us, not only because of our diplomatic status, but also because of our race, our religion, the language that we speak, and make sure that the person that we're choosing, the leader that we're choosing, is not going to let us down once again. Thank you.
Yeah, one of the things that I'd like to say is that from experience, we know that we can look into leaders that express, prioritize human lives over money or over power, who stands for justice and fairness and all kind of justice, from social and equality and equity across the board. But we also understand that as human, our leaders can, may, and will fail us, and that we have to understand, as Aly mentioned before, sometimes it feels like the sky is falling, right? But we have to band together so that we can catch the sky from falling and crushing us as a people, as a unit. Look into a leader that speaks values, not only your personal values, because that can be just your views, but values that is in that will be for the betterment of us as a community, as a people, as a country, as a world. And but also be graceful that sometimes they might fall short from our expectation.
Yeah, and if I could add, I mean, I think it's an important question to ask, who to look for in terms of political leadership. But I do also want to say that, say we're talking about the presidential race, for example. If we got Joe Biden, it would be slightly better than Trump. However, Biden with Obama contributed to the situation that we got in terms of him pushing for more enforcement policies. One of the things that has saved me as an organizer all these years is understanding that there are three levels of self-interest, right? There's the self-interest of Republicans, there's the self-interest of Democrats, and then there's the self-interest of immigrants. And those things don't necessarily intersect. And when I think of leadership, very often I think of people in my own community who have shown over the years that they are true allies to undocumented people who will not sell us out, for their careers. And this is not just about politicians. This is also people within the nonprofit industrial complex. People who say that they are well-meaning allies, but who don't really have the interests of immigrants in the end, in order to get funding for some grant, for example. And I'm not saying be a perfectionist. I mean, that's the thing, is everything that we're going to get, especially from the mainstream political system, is going to be a compromise. When we got DACA, which I pushed for as well as an organizer, I mean, I knew that, it wasn't great, to be honest, but realistically, it was the best thing that we could get at that moment. So I had to set aside sort of my idealism and just focus on, this is it, but this is nowhere near what we need to get to. And I think if we think in terms of transforming the system as opposed to reforming the system, we are moving in the right direction, but we also need to be very, very grounded in the fact that the kind of liberation that we're going to see, we're not going to see it through our political system anytime soon. And the solutions are going to come from the grassroots, as they always do, not from the top down to the grassroots. So I actually have a lot of faith in the community. But I don't have all that much faith, especially in current political leadership, to move us in a positive way, even as we have to make the compromises that we need to make to keep the highest number of people safe from deportation and incarceration along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I meant when I said that maybe there weren't that many questions about politics. There were questions about policies to support and who's doing what and what work should be supported. But there weren't as many questions as I thought there would be about what do we think about the election and should we support Biden or not? I think many of us might be quite skeptical of the system, but there is that argument amongst a lot of abolitionists about the kind of short-term game and the long-term game. And is it, are you working against the your longer-term goals of abolition if you take concessions, if you build alliances with those who are more in the center or on the right? And that may result in things like increased funding for ICE or a border wall, or supporting candidates that end up supporting and voting for those things, which is a constant disappointment. And I think trying to orient ourselves so that we have these incremental changes, we see them as, on the road along the way towards those larger goals. They do not necessarily have to be diametrically opposed, and we can we can vote for Biden and continue to pressure the Democratic Party to see these things and to see their own role historically. And so, yeah, it's very fraught, and it can be I think there was a sense on a lot of the RSVPs that there is a feeling of overwhelm, there is a feeling of exhaustion and burnout, and just the sentiment shared throughout that what we're doing isn't enough, or we don't know where to put our efforts. And yeah, it can be very overwhelming, but this was, I think, incredibly generative and inspiring to me, as it always is, speaking with all of you. So thank you so much.
Yeah, I must go ahead, Guerline, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to a lot of the people. I see my friend Blake Blur, if she's listening, want to say thank you. She is one of the key people helping us fight and connecting with people in detention centers in the Louisiana, Mississippi area, and have been a tremendous ally in the fight to liberate people out of detention. So if she's still there, I just want to acknowledge her work and the work of so many community members who just say, as many people are asking, what can I do? And the what can I do can be call somebody in detention to let them know that you care, as simple as that. And sometimes she will call me and I said, I do not have money to put in the account. She said, I have $5, I'll put it in so that you can get a call. So I just want to use her work and generosity and kindness as an example of how other people can join the fight in the living room by just making a phone call or connecting people with support.
Awesome, thank you all. We're gonna stay for another 9 minutes, but I did want to contribute something. I mean, I think what you all spoke today was extremely important for me. You know, I came into my master's program. I thought I'm originally a grassroots organizer, worked for a youth leadership organization. And then in my mind, I was thinking, like, how do I scale this? How do I make bigger impact? You know, I'm helping a few hundred kids every year, but how can I impact thousands? And at that time, like last year, I was thinking policy. But now going through an education policy program, and maybe it is because it was at Harvard, I realized that the answer didn't lie in policy. You know, it really lies in us and like what we can do and how we can organize to put pressure on the policymakers. And I think it's always important to, I really love what Aly and Guerline said, because you remind us of our individual power to really change and transform these structures, because on their own, they're not transforming anything, they're making it worse. So they need us as individuals, as coalitions or community organizers to really put that pressure and change. So yeah, if you all have we have a few more minutes, so please raise your hand. But thank you again for sharing, and these questions have been really amazing and right on. And so, yeah, I don't know if there's other questions. Feel free to raise your hand or type them into the Q&A.
Laura, we have one person, RS.
Ah, yes, thank you. Thank you for seeing that. Okay, RS, you can go ahead and state your question.
This was great. I work in, I'm a crimmigration organizer, as we like to call it here in Texas. And, you know, everything that you're talking about is exactly, I'm really privileged to work within an organization that has both a criminal justice team and an immigration team. So we intersect and overlap a lot. And some things that I've had trouble with in terms of getting our base and our people kind of with us and learning with us is just having access to anti-Black information, things that are in Spanish. And so I didn't know if there were some things that you all could recommend, whether it's just like easy, accessible readings or anything that we could pass along so we can have a collective, accessible conversation together.
We have the blessed opportunity to work with a translation organization that can translate material into Spanish, but we also have a lot of Afro-Latino immigrants who speak both Spanish and English, you know, from different countries within the Caribbean and even from Africa that we can bring into the space. And I think, thank you again for joining, but I think one of the best ways to have that is to bring, you know, the Black community into whatever program you might be putting together, you know, a webinar or a convening. Make sure that you include, you know, Black immigrants into that. And as I mentioned, we have a lot of Afro-Latino community members that can present, that can join, that can share. And of course, other folks who can also have translation. You know, bringing language access is very one of the key things that we want to make sure that includes, you know, in our advocacy, in our movement building. So yeah, so reach out to us. We will connect you with some of our Afro-Latino members, and we can work together on creating programs and collaborating to make sure that we bring Black immigrant experience into your space.
Thank you.
I think those were the last of our questions. So we can close now. I don't know if Aly, Guerline, or Tina, if you have any closing remarks.
Jess, thank you. Thank you everyone for attending and those who are still here. This was an incredible honor for me to be able to participate in this.
We have one last question. Sorry, Marta Vallejo. Let me add her.
Let's see.
I see a couple of questions. I'm not sure if those were all answered.
Yeah.
One from Linda, another one from Sam. Who is making money off of the criminalization of immigrants and mass incarceration? How do they make money? Tina, you want to answer that? Who's making money?
Everyone.
Yeah. I mean, the first answer that comes to mind are private prison corporations that make money off of detention and incarceration. And actually, immigration has been much more of a cash cow to private prison industries than the criminal legal system. So there's a kind of a debate amongst abolitionists on how much focus to put on abolishing private prisons or how important they are. But I think under Trump, before Trump came into office, about 45% of migrants in detention were held in private facilities, and about 10% of those in jails and prisons. And then under Trump, that number has gone up to 75, near 75% that are in private facilities in recent years. And the private prison industries have gained power over recent decades and have started to become lobbyists, very powerful lobbyists in Washington. And so now politicians are, getting lobbying dollars from these organizations and campaign funds, and they're starting to help author some of these laws that increase the criminalization of migrants. One infamous one is SB 10 in Arizona, and then copycat laws like SB 4 in Texas. But there's also a host of other industries that are less visible, such as the food and healthcare contractors that serve prisons and detention centers. There's also, when we think about the militarization of the border and border enforcement and military contracting, these systems have become increasingly interconnected. And so there is a cabal of interests that want to keep the system in place. And I don't know if anyone else wants to speak more to that.
And Tina, from what we understand, is that taxpayers' money pay up to $180, in some cases even more, for each person detained and in private immigration prison and also county jails. So we are paying to cage people, literally.
Mm-hmm.
We are paying to cage people indefinitely, if possible, based on the way policies and executive orders are being signed left to right. That is the danger we see, and it is a system for profit. And as Tina mentioned, a lot of heavy lobbying in DC and other places to keep those systems in place.
Yeah. And I would also add just really quickly that cities and states feel like they can stand to profit also from just building jails in their towns, getting federal dollars to flow from the federal level to the local level. And so there is a pull and a lobby there, not just for privately run facilities, but also for state and local run jails. I think Martha's unmuted finally. We're sorry about not being able to unmute you before, but if you want to speak.
Thank you very much. I am a social worker, and we created a year ago or 10 months ago an immigration justice task force for all Florida. And listening to you, and we have done, well, listening to you, I feel that we have done nothing because your work is so amazing. And we recently have one of our colleagues who did an interview to Alejandra from Al Otro Lado. So, and for many years as an immigrant, I'm also an immigrant, and it was a huge long process in order to be, I don't know how to say it anymore after listening to you, but you have used words to really describe a lot of situations within the immigrants' rights movement. And as Guerline said, right now we are putting people in jails. We were part, or I am part of a visitation group, nonprofit group or voluntary group that go to the nearest detention center, or one of the nearest, that is Broward Detention Center. And we know very, very close. And from as a therapist, I'm also a therapist in helping immigrants to write evaluations, psychosocial evaluations. So I put a psychosocial trauma informed about how traumatic their lives have been and how strong they are, trying to write in the most sensitive, but also that they, when the immigration officers read the story, they read a coherent story of someone that really has suffered, but has a lot to contribute. I appreciate the conversation regarding Blackness within the immigrant movement. I appreciate that distinction that many times is done regarding the good immigrant who has never committed a crime and the immigrant. I think you have put words in things. It gives me really goosebumps in things that many times we are very timid or very shy to talk about. And in our next group, we are like 10 people, and I will really, and we like to expand, but you know, it is, I will really want to be in touch with you and see if you can also come to one of our conversations and create that bonus to understand, because even though social workers, you know, our main mission is to enhance the well-being of those most vulnerable. But social workers in their daily lives forget about that. You know, there are a lot of technicalities in every agency where they work, and oh my God, you know, but so to bring that word and to listen to you directly, and we have a lot of African American, this is an organization in Florida of 600 members. And I have tried to bridge that, you know, we come from all these white supremacists. It is, you know, and my native language is not English. So I even though I think I speak well English, you know, you struggle a lot to put the right words when the topic is so sensitive, you know, because at times you think that you said something and maybe you will hurt someone. And then and we are trying to help really the people, but your conversation has touched me so deeply. I'm so touched that I was not even going to talk, but really we want this conversation to go to an organization of social workers and we have already started transforming, but I think we have done workshops about immigrants. Of course, the majority of immigrants that I have worked with are Central American, but also at the detention center where we were going, there's one of our colleagues and members of the task force and social workers who speaks French and has talked a lot about the Cameroon, people from Cameroon, from Sierra Leone, from the West Africa. On the other side, I'm very moved from that journey because I'm from Colombia, and I have heard how people travel 7 countries. You too? 7 countries. 11 countries. People will never understand that if they are just in their homes listening to, I don't know what they listen truly. But thank you very much. And I will really contact you and try to establish this bridge between the work you do, because we need to bring this conversation to more deeply to social workers. We have started the conversation regarding white supremacists because one of the proclamation was why were families separated at the border. You know, and it's not at the border. It's every day in all houses. And also, if we go further, it is also with the African American community and DCF and all these things that really have nothing to do with human rights or with creating opportunities for people to continue growing within their own families. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Marta, for being here and sharing. Actually, Broward County is one of the detention centers where we have a lot of Haitians and other Black migrants and African Americans because of you know, the community. So we are really looking forward to speaking with you some more and see how we can collaborate. myself, Laura, Tina, Aly, and others, you know, who are within the movement, who might be closer to where you are. We really are looking forward to continue this journey with you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Guerline. Thank you, Aly. Thank you, Laura, and thank you, Tina. We will be in touch again.
Thank you.
And thanks. And if I could add just briefly,
Mm-hmm.
I'm so, first of all, the work that you do is amazing. You know, when people, you know, downplay their work, I always sort of want to have this check of like, if you're doing anything right now, you're doing your best and you're contributing. So thank you for that. But I really wanted to highlight, like, I'm so glad that you bring up the issue of trauma, because there is no such thing as organizing on this issue without having to confront that. And I remember a couple of years ago, a couple of us worked on an anti-racial profiling campaign in order to bring in folks to do immigrants' rights work as well. And the groups that we were working with was an interfaith group, and it was mostly Latinx pastors and Black pastors. And the organizing was slow as molasses, and there was distrust, and it just felt dysfunctional. And at a certain point, we were like, this is not working out. And we literally brought in an expert who does racial dialogue work. And we stopped the organizing. We had like a whole week of just checking in with each other. And it was amazing because you had all of these pastors sharing these traumatic issues around race, around how white supremacy had impacted them, around how it made them distrust each other. But once we had that week, the organizing just shot through the roof. All of a sudden, people were all on board because they trusted each other. So if we didn't have the pause to really check in with those individuals, I don't think that we would have succeeded in the campaign. It was in order to get cops to stop asking questions of national origin during routine traffic violations. But we literally didn't have a choice but to address the trauma as we did the organizing. If we hadn't done so, I don't believe that we would have been successful. So that's a big part of the work, and I appreciate you bringing that up.
Thank you, Aly. And truly, we can have a conversation. I think I have been, that's what a few attorneys, I only do my psychosocial evaluation myself, but now it's an opportunity with COVID-19 that I started doing the Zoom meetings with my clients. I believe so much in human contact that I was, I don't want to deal with that telehealth or mental health. I know it's good. I know it's a development, but the human contact is also very, very, very meaningful. So we can have a discussion about the psychosocial evaluations based on trauma and strengths, not to talk about, because many psychosocial evaluations, according to my perspective, are based on deficits. How the person is so traumatized. Yeah, they are traumatized, but there are a lot of literature about how post-traumatic growth goes together with that trauma, and with that anxiety, and with that. So I think because of the stories, I write the story of the person, and then I utilize literature and quotations on trauma about how the person had been affected and how the person should not be sent back to a very unsafe environment or separated from a family that are their main support emotionally and financially. Thank you. Thank you. We will continue talking about this. Because now, no matter where the person is, I can do it. I have a license in Florida, but I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I also have a certification in trauma. So if I can be of any help, please let me know.
Thank you, Martha. Thank you so much for your work. And yeah, I want to echo what Aly said. Anyone doing anything during these times it's incredibly impressive. And it's also definitely okay for us to really slow down and take care of ourselves and do what we have to do, which looking inward and doing less is not a slight. It's actually a way to move forward. It's a way to regenerate. It's a way to, further ourselves. So, but yes, thank you so much. I think we have to close now. And we will continue the conversation though. So I love what was created today. This has been incredibly generative, and we will be updating the document with the recording from this webinar and resources as we add them. So again, everybody, please feel free to email me or any of us, and we will continue.
Okay.
Bye.
Okay. I don't know if you're seeing me, but
Thank you.
kisses and hugs.
Bye.
Yes, virtual hugs to all.
Yes.
Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Take care. Bye,
Take
bye,
care.
bye. Bye. Take
Thank
care.
you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.